Hello, everyone in the Bible class. This is Tim Reed here, and this is the screencast for our class on Exodus. The first image I have here on the screen is the end of Genesis. Each of you, we did the course on Genesis, and this image right here is Joseph reuniting with all of his family. We have the happy reunion where Joseph's in charge of Egypt, and all of Jacob's family migrates down to Egypt in the region of Goshen, and they stay there. Well, we need to keep reading the story because God promised that Jacob and all of his descendants would get the promised land of Canaan. And at the end of Genesis, they're not in the promised land of Canaan. So we really need to continue the story. And the story goes on. The book is Exodus. Exodus is considered the heart of the Torah, the heart of the Pentateuch. It's the story of God's covenant with his chosen people. That's why it's the heart of the Pentateuch. We as Catholic Christians, our defining story moment is when Jesus dies on the cross and rises from the dead. That's the story that defines us as a people. Well, this story of the Exodus, this story here is what defines our Jewish brothers and sisters as a people. It's the time where the Lord shows his steadfast love. In Hebrew, that is chesed. It means steadfast or unending love for his people. He gets involved on their behalf and saves them from slavery and gives them his law on Mount Sinai. And the Hebrew word for law is Torah. Here we are in Egypt. This is a map of the ancient Egyptian empire. As you can see there, Egypt is sort of divided into Upper Egypt, which is right here. It's called Upper because of the higher mountains, higher mountain ranges, higher elevation. And Lower Egypt down here with the Nile Delta. The Nile River, being the longest river in the world, is actually a very welcome oasis in this land that is mostly desert. So along the Nile you have rich, fertile land, and the ancient Egyptians settled along this river. Here's a timeline of Egyptian history, and I'm just going to put a couple other things up here. The the period we're looking at is right here, where it says the Hyksos invasion. The Hyksos were these Semitic nomads that invaded Egypt from the north and east, and they were actually the ruling class in Egypt for couple hundred years, starting around here and going in towards the year 1000 BC. Now, if you remember the Joseph story, Joseph was a Semitic wandering person from the land of Canaan who came in and became a leader of types in Egypt. So this story of Joseph, a Semitic tribesman coming in and becoming a leader, was not all that far from the reality of Egyptian history. In this mural down here, you can see we have the more dark-skinned Egyptians, and then the Hyksos, or Apiru, as they called them, invaders from the north coming in and sort of taking over things for a period of time. Apiru is the Egyptian word from which we get the term Hebrew, which is what the people will eventually call themselves, one of the names that they will have. The Exodus, it's believed, sort of takes place around the 1200s here, and that is during the reign of this pharaoh, King Ramses II, whom we'll get into in just a moment. Now, this slide here deals with one of the pharaohs that ruled Egypt in the 1300s. His name is Akhenaten. Akhenaten was a unique pharaoh. First off, all of the Egyptian art changed at this time. We see here the Egyptians being portrayed as having these long necks, and the back of their heads are all swollen. But also, Akhenaten changed things drastically for the Egyptians. He used to be named Amenhotep IV, but then he changed his name to Akhenaten because he believed that Aten, the sun disk, was the one and only god to be worshipped by the Egyptians. So he was an early monotheist. In the ancient world, this was really weird and unheard of. Polytheism was the way to go. But here is a pharaoh, a ruler of Egypt, a king of Egypt, Akhenaten, and he is saying there's only one God, and we will worship that one God alone, Aten, the sun disk. The Hebrews that had since been enslaved in ancient Egypt, they could possibly have been influenced by this monotheistic pharaoh who they in their traditions of telling stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, who had encounters with their one true God, Yahweh, that they would also be influenced by this pharaoh. And in the century after, we get the rule of Ramses II, sometimes called Ramses the Great by historians. This statue still stands in Egypt, as do many, many, many statues of good old Ramses II. Most scholars say that he was probably pharaoh during the time period where the Exodus took place. According to the historical record, he is responsible for the building of the cities of Pithom and Ramses, the cities that are mentioned in the first chapter of the book of Exodus. Ramses nowadays doesn't look, I'm sure, as imposing as he was back then, but let's not forget the Egyptians knew how to mummify their bodies, and of course the pharaohs would get special attention. Now, this next bit, I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to read yourselves. I have a document here. It's several questions, and you would, in order to complete this document, you would have to read Exodus chapter 1 through chapter 7, verse 13. Chapter 6 is not really essential, so you can kind of skip that. But if you want to be a little ahead for the next class on Exodus, the next Bible class, I have this worksheet here, and I'm going to scroll through it slowly in case you don't want to be getting an email. But if you do want to get this document in an email from me, my email name is Theology. That's, here, I'll just I'll type it in here so you can see it. FeehanTheology @gmail.com. If you want me to email this document to you so you can get a little sort of ahead of the game on the Exodus class, I'll be very happy to do that. So that is my email, and I will post it to that YouTube username as well. But I will also just scroll through it slowly so that you can see all the questions. All the questions that deal with the enslavement of the Hebrews, the birth of a young man named Moses, his being saved from the wrath of Pharaoh, his having to flee the land of Egypt, his marriage, and eventually his encounter with God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who shares his name with Moses, which is a very big moment. And then, continuing on with his conversation with the Lord, his journey back to Egypt, and his encounter with the Pharaoh, yet again, to ask him to let his people go. So there's all the questions. You can sort of scroll slowly through the video and pause it if you want to write them down and you don't want to get the document. Or I can just email you the document. And again, that's feehandtheology@gmail.com. If you have any questions, you can send me emails from there. Otherwise, look forward to seeing you at the class.